Hi, I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Good evening and welcome to Single Shot at Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Roundtable. The last year was truly a year of photography creating fakes. Everybody created fakes, politicians, companies, private people, and this year made us to realize that maybe not everything we see on a photo is true, even though it always been like this since the photography was invented. This is the moment when we're starting to realize it. And what's peculiar about it, we really thought that it's bad. Everybody was looking at it as something negative, but we wanted to look into illusion in photography and figure out maybe there is something good and positive and progressive about it. And in order to discuss it, we invited an extremely peculiar individual, a seasoned great photographer, and at the same time professional illusionist, Harry Mandel. Hello, Harry. Hi. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My
let's
pleasure.
talk about illusion.
Oh, let's talk about illusions. No, you have to pay me for that. But illusions and photography, I think it's been going on ever since the Vietnam War or even before then.
Actually, the most famous image of Abraham Lincoln is an illusion.
Oh, right.
It's a composite.
Right. Yeah, it was a composite, right. Some people weren't even sure if it was really him. But as far as when I started getting into the knowledge of knowing that you can manipulate a scene, and this is without post-production, this is without Photoshop, without computers, just being in a street with a crowd of people, you can make them look like there's 1,000 people there, or you can make it look like the 20 people that are really there. You know, depending on how you go back or how you go forward.
Indeed, the illusion begins specifically at choices photographers make.
Right.
The choices of equipment, the choices of angle, the choices of lighting, the choices of the theme.
I know. I know. Well, myself, I mean, without, you know, doing any manipulation, straight out of camera, except maybe just cropping, I was standing in the Barnes & Noble building near Union Square, and I was looking out the window, and I took a picture of the park across the street. And you can see the buildings behind it, and the office buildings and all that. When I cropped all the office buildings out, and you can see it on one of my photos, it's just an orange-looking building. It looks, people thought I was in the Bahamas. They had no idea that this was in New York City. And I thought, I kept my mouth shut for a while and said, yeah, try to figure out where this is. Because people don't notice things. And without the background as a reference, they can't, they're not able to see where the image is really being taken place. I mean, if you know the George Washington Bridge, and I'm walking down along the highway and I'm taking a picture of the George Washington Bridge, you say, oh, that's the George Washington Bridge, and he's in Washington Heights and he's there. But standing in the Barnes & Noble building, taking the shot of this, I think it's a restaurant, and it has umbrellas around the tables and stuff like that. You can't, without seeing the office buildings, without seeing the people, you cannot tell what part of the world this photograph was taken, right? So you can fool the people just like that. I can say, yeah, I was on vacation in Timbuktu. It was a wonderful restaurant. We ate all kinds of exotic food there.
Well, but it's probably not just about fooling people. It's more probably about the actual art The actual creating a reality that never existed before, creating a dream in a way.
Right, yeah, you can do that as well. You know, it's like going to the Bronx Zoo, and if you crop the photos just right, nobody knows where you are. You can make a tree trunk a work of art if you focus on it correctly. You know, and then the animals, you know, I could tell people, I have a beautiful picture of a tiger. I tell people, yeah, I was in India when I took this picture.
Oh, so that's probably when photography became to be a true media of art, not just media of journalism, when photographers realized that manipulating their field of view, giving them the ability to actually express something more than what
Sure.
they saw
Well,
when
I mean,
in front of the camera.
it all started, I guess, like everybody else. You get a little brownie camera. Well, I'm dating myself, but you get a little box camera, and you take pictures of your family. You take pictures of your neighborhood, and then all of a sudden you decide, what happens if I tilt the camera this way? You know, what am I going to get? You know, what happens if I back up, or if I come like really close? Like all of a sudden, a sewer becomes a work of art.
Indeed.
Right, you know, or a fence, or a tie clip, or something, you know, just by zooming in and zooming out. In the old days, they didn't have zoom lenses, so you had to like actually move and go back. And I taught digital photography for a little bit at the Nagel Avenue Y, and I told my students, I said, if you don't have a zoom lens, don't worry about it. You have feet.
Wow.
You can walk back and forth. I said, you don't, and they would look at me because they would see my camera, and I had this like small little lens. They go, what is that? I said, it's a 35mm lens. I like to use that walking around the city. And they go, can't you? I said, no, if I want to get closer to something, I walk over to it. If I want to see a panoramic view of something, I walk back. You know, because people are used to, you know, just zooming in and out. I handed my camera once to my nephew, and he goes, how do you zoom this thing? I said, you don't. You know, you have to use your brain, you know, to go in and out. But a zoom lens, I do use zoom lenses, and they are fun. And again, you can manipulate. As I'm looking in the camera, as I zoom in and out, I start getting ideas how this is going to crop.
Oh.
And I like doing a lot of stuff in camera, so I don't waste a lot of time at post-production. I don't have Photoshop. I do use Lightroom, but I don't have Photoshop, so I don't manipulate my pictures that much. You know, we'll get into that later.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Wow, it's actually peculiar that you specifically mentioned 35mm.
Yeah.
Because that is optically the closest you get to what you see with two eyes.
Right.
That's
I
the
was
most
just going to say that.
realistic view, yeah.
Yeah, many years ago I learned that. But depending what kind of camera you're using, if you're using full frame.
Yeah,
well,
full frame, yes.
Yeah,
35
but if you're using a
full frame.
crop, then it's closer, the 35 becomes closer to a 52.
So which is one eye.
Right. So it's, you know,
Yeah,
it's
this is a magic range between 50 and 35.
right.
That's why they not wide angle and not telephoto. That's why
Right.
they're normal.
I know. That's why I have both a 35 and a 50. If I'm shooting, I specialize in shooting other magicians' performances,
Yeah.
and I find the 35mm lens in a theater at 1.8 is fantastic. You know, so it's like I can capture the nuances. I get clear photos. I get, you know, just beautiful shots instead of, you know, just blurred out of focus, you know, nonsense. So I love the 35mm. I love my 85mm too. I use for portraits, headshots, you know, 50mm.
Wow. That was actually what I wanted to mention, that once you step out of this magic normal lens range, that's when the illusion, my apologies, starting. Because once you're using that, that's already not exactly the reality you see. Basically, if 35 to 50 represented by this, the wide angle is reality bended towards the viewer,
Right.
and the
Yeah,
telephoto is bended away.
Right, and you get the compression. You know, it's
Yeah.
like, well, the example is to say if you have two people sitting on a bench,
Yeah.
and you're using a 35 or 50mm lens, they're sitting on either end of the bench. Use a 105 or 135, they're sitting next to each other.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, so that is the biggest illusion. I learned that when I was so young. I looked at that and I said, oh my God, I know they're not sitting next to each other. But if I used a 135 millimeter lens, they were sitting right next to each other. And I knew then, and this was back in the 60s, that you could manipulate a photo without even going into the darkroom.
And that's exactly what manipulation of the story using just your analog equipment is.
Right.
If those people just sitting on the other ends of the bench, they probably completely not related to each other in terms of narrative. But just bringing them closer by means of optics, you're already creating a story that connects two individuals who are completely disconnected.
I used to joke around, this back in the late 60s, early 70s, I used to joke. I says, give me enough time in the darkroom, and I'll have you shaking hands with Chairman Mao.
No.
You know, because
now it became much easier to reproduce something like this, but the general idea remained the same.
Right, but you know, but I noticed that focal lengths are a big manipulation factor.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, and it's like, oh, there's music.
Well, we will get back to this question after a short break. Alrighty, so before we'll move to the part where the real magic begins, the post-production, there is one thing I just wanted to mention in connection to manipulating reality with just taking a picture, taking double exposure.
Ah.
That was one of the oldest tricks that was used to actually create Photoshop stuff.
Right, right, and magicians used to use double exposure to show a film of a magic show. And people were amazed, you know, when they first started.
I never heard of that.
Yeah, when they first started shooting movies, the silent, they would use double exposure and quick shots and stuff like that to manipulate the magic tricks.
Oh, man,
that's why today, when you're watching a magic show on TV, they go, the camera will not cut away. What the camera sees is what you see, you know, because people know you could do something with the camera, double exposure.
Well, you can do a lot with the camera,
oh,
and
yeah.
Now every year it becomes to be more and more. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, the public opinion based on traditional understanding of photography is pretty much media of journalism with some aesthetic undertones.
Right.
Considering it to be a definitely negative trend, but I would say that there is a lot positive in the idea that the general public starting to understand that photograph doesn't have to be realistic. Right now it creates more of a frustration than anything else, and everybody screams fake with a lot of righteous or maybe not so righteous anger, but it already starting to sink into the mind of your regular viewer that if it's not real, even if it's obviously not real, it's still a piece of art, and it might be even more interesting piece of art. And in order to achieve it, 21st century gave us a lot of interesting means. You mentioned that you're using Lightroom for your editing, and it's
but basically when I use Lightroom, it's usually to tweak a shot to, because let's step back. Like for example, tonight was an overcast night. There was no moon out, no stars, and I want to take a picture of a building.
yes.
And I'm looking at it, and I know I don't want to push the ISO or the ISO level up on the camera because I don't want to get a lot of noise. So I took it at a 1600 ISO, and I said to myself, I know when I get back home, I'm going to have to take the shadows because my eye can see the shadows. Your eye can see the camera can't. So I know when I go home, I'm going to bring up the shadows because it's going to show all the nuances and the lines of the building that I couldn't get without, you know. So I know in my mind already. I said, I know this is going to be a good shot, but I know the shadows are going to be totally gone. It's going to be like totally black.
Well, in this case, it's actually also very interesting, but a little bit different phenomena. You're actually using the modern means of manipulating photography in order to reflect more accurately what you actually saw.
Right.
Which
That's my first thing. Now, on the other hand, there have been times, and people ask me, you know, how did you get that photograph? It looked, and I tell them, I said, the original photograph was taken in the summer. For example, I have a picture of trees and a riverbank, and the original photograph was taken in the summer. All the trees are green, and the grass is green, and everything's like. And I looked at it, and I didn't like the photo. A friend of mine who's a painter loved it, and he said, "Can I paint this?" And I said, "Sure, but I don't like the photo." And he said, "No, it's a great photo." And I kept looking at it and looking at it. So I put it in Lightroom, and I hit a preset called Autumn. And it changed all the greens to yellow and orange, and then I loved the photo.
Oh.
So I changed the season, and it wasn't pre-planned. It just came to me.
Now that is great in reality that never existed before.
And then, not only, and you know, it's too late now, but I loved the picture so much, I entered it in an art gallery, and they sold it, and I never told them that the picture's manipulated because it was really taken in the middle of summer.
Oh, again, I really don't believe personally that this should be a requirement for a photographer to warn everybody that the picture was manipulated. The painter is not warning his viewers that he removed some of the paint imperfections from the building or added an extra work in process, which we know from history every painter did at one capacity or another.
I mean, I'm not the type of person that would take a photograph of you and then put, you know, like Marilyn Monroe next to you and say, look, you know, the two of you were hanging out, or let's say, you know, or try to manipulate a photograph to create fake news.
Well, that's two completely different parts of photography and reasons for manipulation. One is to change the narrative, and it's still journalism. Now, that would be a dishonest journalism, which obviously is bad. Even, but we have journalism, we have a novel, and we have science fiction. Why there can be science fiction in photography?
But sometimes, you know, the reality, because I keep thinking, the reality, a normal day, it's a beautiful day. It's not 12 noon. It's like maybe a couple hours after noon, and the sky is beautiful, and the trees are glistening, and you take out your camera and you try to capture this, and it doesn't work. It happens, right?
Quite often.
Yeah, so you go back into Lightroom and you go, I'm going to make the sky a little bit bluer. I'm going to make the clouds a little bit whiter. And it's going to look like you saw it, but you are manipulating the photograph because the camera cannot see as many colors as your eye can. So I don't feel guilty about manipulating a shot like that.
Oh, I'm pretty sure there is no guilt in manipulating photograph as long as the result creates this wow
Right.
effect and makes somebody happier.
Yeah, and you know, the reason I think the reason they made these computer programs was because they realized that if you have a $300 camera or a $6,000 camera, you're going to capture the colors a little differently.
Absolutely.
You know, so the less expensive camera, it's going to need help. It's going to need to make the sky a little bit bluer. It's going to need the clouds to be white. And the glistening, the gold shimmering stuff that you see on the leaves and you try to capture are gone because the camera can't get it. So you have to change. I mean, it could be as basic as changing the white balance. A white balance, I learned digital photography a few years ago because I was always into film and I was resistant to digital. But then I learned that just changing the white balance can change your whole look of the photo. And I was fascinated because, like I said, I take a lot of shots of people on stage, and there's all different color lights, and there's different temperature of the lights. You know, and the Kelvin could go from 2,000 to 8,000, and you're going crazy. So I put it on automatic white balance because I can't go crazy. You know, and I do it in post production, and I see the performer looks a little too orange, so I'll cool it down a little bit, and I go, wow, he looks real.
Perfect.
You know, so that's all you need to do. It's just by, if I do nothing else, because I used to love to sit there and do a lot of post-production, but now I find it's a waste of time. I just want to get in there and get out, get paid, get out, man. But there are certain shots I'll sit there and I'll play with to get it perfect. But a lot of shots, they're good, the angles are good, I know everything is good, so I just change the white balance and it's like night and day.
Oh, so the magic is in white balance.
Yes, the white balance.
For me, it's normally a touch of tungsten, but for you, it's just having it bright daylight. We'll be back after this brief pause for last section. Right, so our show is reaching the end, and traditionally at this point we're asking our guests to give advice to photographers. Since we're talking here with a specialist in two fascinating professions, I wanted to ask you for an advice as a photographer and illusionist both. How a photographer can make his photograph that at least to some part is illusion. We established that every photograph is illusion to a degree, to look as real as it's possible.
Well, they have a saying in magic, watch your angles. And it's the same thing, you know, it's the magician when he's doing sleight of hand, close up, or an illusion, they has to watch the angles. The person sitting in the audience cannot be in the wrong angle, because once the angle is broken, the secret is discovered. So in photography, it's the same thing. You can look at, two people can look at the same object, and one person will shoot it straight on, and the other person will shoot on a straight, on a slight angle, or just by using the rule of thirds, simply, will change the whole photograph. And it's the same thing with an illusionist. When David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear, it was all about angles.
I never knew how he did it.
Well, there were two theories, and I'm not allowed to discuss it right now, maybe privately. But it was all about lighting, angles, and white balance.
So photography and prestige are actually still coming from the same root.
Right, yeah, they come in hand in hand. That's why I always felt comfortable. I joke around with my friends. I said, ever since I was a little kid, I walked around with a deck of cards in this hand and a camera in this hand, because to me, they were both magical. To take a photograph of somebody and have it forever, to me was like something you captured an instant moment in history that will never happen again. You can do it for news, you can do it for art, you can do it for pleasure, but you have that instant moment. To me, it was so magical.
It is indeed the ultimate magic you can create, and just the mere fact that you're painting with light, which
that's
name of photography suggests.
Photography is all about catching the light. If you don't got the right light,
there is no photography.
There is no photography.
Wow. So good light and good illusions for you, Harry. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I have 10,000 things to ask you. Maybe I'll have to ask you to come back again.
We'll get together again, I'm sure.
Thank you.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark Unger for Roundtable. Thanks for watching.